I became a judge, they gave me a gavel, not a rubber stamp. And nobody comes to my court expecting a rubber stamp.
Well, Judge Gorsuch came off a little bit like he was running for president, you know, not just for his appointment to the Supreme Court.
He's a soundbite machine.
He is a soundbite machine, very telegenic, very confident, stressing judicial independence from the man who nominated him. So how did it hold up to scrutiny, and what does it mean for the Democrats? Let's bring back our panel. Jason Johnson, Jackie Kucinich, Patrick Healy. Professor, you do have Elizabeth Warren making, you know, somewhat of a compromised attempt to say, hey, we should hold off on Gorsuch until we figure out the conclusion of the FBI investigation. Unlikely, the political play obvious. Can the Democrats not vote for Gorsuch?
Oh, yeah, they can not vote for him, but they kind of missed their chance last year, Chris. I mean, you know, this wouldn't have happened if President Obama had actually used the powers at his disposal and put Merrick Garland on the court. But since they didn't do that, it looks very likely that Gorsuch is going to be elected. The Democrats can filibuster, they can complain, it'll just trigger the sort of nuclear option. There is nothing they can do about this. And from a PR standpoint, Gorsuch has done a very good job of making himself seem reasonable and pleasant and kind, even if his rulings may be something that's out of the mainstream.
And yet, Jackie, there's still so much bitterness, understandably, about how the Merrick Garland thing was handled that Democrats are dug in, but, you know, to what end?
Well, not only bitterness on that at that hearing, but bitterness among their base, and they're receiving a lot of pressure to make hay of this from those outside of the Capitol, and until that, and that's sort of where they are. So politically, it isn't necessarily bad for Democrats to be doing this. Now, will this deny Gorsuch the seat? No, I don't think so at all.
You know, it's interesting. This is the best kind of grilling to get if you have to be grilled by anyone in Congress, because there's an understanding, Pat, that you don't have to speak to the merits of whatever you're being asked about. You know, they're giving that allowance. And we've seen it play out time and time again as a farce, right? Men and women get on the bench and they become exactly what you suspected them as politically. But how did he come off relatively to what we've seen in the past?
He not only was sticking to the incredible prep and talking points that every Supreme Court nominee is given, but he has just a natural command and frankly kind of stage presence. You know, when he is sitting there, he has actual charisma that he's able to give off, but his intelligence shone through, his sort of good humor in moments, but also he knew when to say, I'm going to be independent, you know, from President Trump. I'm going to rule against him, you know, if needs be. But I'm also not going to answer, you know, questions on precedent. I'm not going to talk about Roe v. Wade. I'm just going to give you a good soundbite.
He does have some rulings that Democrats should never be in line with.
Right.
But they didn't get to the heart of those rulings either.
Right. No, and absolutely. I mean, this is what nominees are expected to do. I mean, they're expected to essentially say, you know, I didn't talk to the president about my views. I would never take a litmus test. But these nominees are chosen for a reason. You know, President Trump knew exactly what he was getting. And to Jason's point earlier, the Democrats had their moment. They had their nuclear option, you know, last year. They decided not to go down that road.
Okay, so Jason, let's switch gears now to a new wrinkle in the investigation into whether or not there are any ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. This Ukrainian lawmaker yesterday released what he says are new financial documents that he's found that reveal that Paul Manafort laundered money in Kyrgyzstan through his, you know, based on his work with Yanukovych. So that got the attention of John McCain and Lindsey Graham, and I suppose the FBI. What are we to make of this?
Look, at this point, Allison, like, there are fewer Russian operatives on the Americans than in the Trump administration. Like, this is ridiculous. but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter until Lindsey Graham and John McCain and several other senators start saying there need to be consequences for these kinds of connections. It's all a bunch of screaming and yelling and foot stamping. Like, at this point, you've had so many different people with these connections, but we haven't seen a lot of firings. We haven't seen a lot of consequences. So really, I think it's a lot of unnecessary hand-wringing, but until there's consequences, until President Trump himself has to testify and say, look, this is what I did or did not know, none of this is really going to matter.
Let's listen to what McCain said.
I have serious questions about some of the people around the presidential campaign. There were people with close ties to the Russians, and including an individual who was paid large sums of money by Yanukovych, who was the Russian stooge as the president of Ukraine.
You're talking about Paul Manafort specifically.
I'm talking about Mr. Manafort, his relations.
Jackie Kucinich, now obviously McCain, a Republican, but this is a Democratic issue largely. The White House did the Democrats a favor with Flynn. They threw him under the bus. You could argue they didn't need to, but they did. Do you think that this is a potential misfire by the Democrats? Do you think they'll be able to make a real case against Manafort other than just throwing the name Yanukovych all over the place, which won't mean anything to most Americans anyway?
I think if they make this a partisan issue, that you know, maybe it doesn't matter as much. What the problem lies is, to your point earlier about Trump's credibility. I think it was Spicer just a day or two ago was trying to say that Paul Manafort wasn't a major part of the campaign. He was campaign manager.
Chairman.
So yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, different title, but basically the same function. So that's not true. So he was closely affiliated with the campaign, and when you're talking about Paul Manafort, it's not a good day for the White House. And it's not a good day for Republicans who have to answer questions about Paul Manafort because they don't want to anymore.
I think it was worse for Spicer than it was for Manafort, to be honest. I have not seen the facts that back up the allegations on Paul Manafort. I get that it doesn't smell good, but I'm saying to take that next step legally, I haven't seen it. But Spicer, to get the dates wrong, to try to trivialize the guy who was the savior going into the convention, they were sunk going into that convention. Manafort came in, made phone calls, worked his contacts, and totally righted the ship.
They couldn't get anybody to speak at that convention. I mean, Paul Manafort is the one job that he had to do, other than you know, kind of delegates, and he knocked heads, and he, you know, they put together a decent convention. But I mean, the reality is, you know, Jackie's right. I mean, this was a worse moment for Sean Spicer. Yes, you have, you know, John McCain, you know, kind of sticking it to Trump and, you know, keeping that concern out there very much about what Paul Manafort did and closeness to Russians. But then for Sean Spicer to come out, you know, onto the podium, and yes, he's carrying President Trump's water every time he's doing it, you know, and he's you know, saying things that the president wants him to say. But to be going through, like, you know, down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole with, like, who Paul Manafort was, it's a credibility killer.
I heard from Democrats last night. It was funny, just to the point about Spicer. When Spicer said there's nothing there, that was the first time I got calls from Democrats back saying, hey, maybe there's something there.
We will talk much more about Sean Spicer in a few minutes. Panel, thank you very much.
All right, now to